We can't stop and won't stop going through the top 100 players of the 2000s for fantasy football. Let's dig in. All right. If you're not familiar with the process, basically we're ranking all of these guys. There's some formula, so there's some algorithms, and then there's just a little bit of gut feel on some of it. But we're going from 70 through 61. If you missed some of the earlier episodes, go back and check those out. Give you great context as to what's going on, who we've already talked about, and who might still be available for this and coming episodes. All right. So at 70, and actually, the first two guys we're going to talk about here are both at the quarterback position. So at 70, we've got Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan, maybe he didn't quite have the overall career of some of the guys that we're going to be talking about, but a much better fantasy career than I think people would have guessed for a guy like Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan actually had 8 quarterback one seasons over the course of his career. And during that time, he had 2 seasons where he actually finished all the way up at quarterback 2 overall. So Matt Ryan, even though he didn't have the Konami code, the secret password for the rushing attack, he had some really solid seasons there. And a lot of that, yeah, we'll give a little bit of credit to Julio Jones because he really helped bolster some of those seasons in the mid-2010s there. But overall, Matt Ryan, very solid fantasy football asset. And he was a reliable guy for most of his career for your fantasy football team. All right, as you all chuckle and giggle, we are at number 69, and we've got Dak Prescott as the quarterback here for the top 100. Yes, Dak Prescott still has many years ahead of him, so we're expecting that he's going to climb up this list. But in his short career, he's done a lot of good things. Aside from his one season that was cut short due to injury, he only had one other season where he was not a QB1. We saw him as a top 6 guy as a rookie, and then 2 other seasons where he finished as a top 3 quarterback. You add in that he has another top 100 player on this list in CeeDee Lamb catching footballs from him. It makes him a pretty solid guy moving forward. Now, of course, we're not quite sure what the contract's going to hold. And yes, maybe he doesn't run quite as much as he did earlier in his career, but this past season, he was quarterback 3 overall, so it doesn't seem to be affecting him too much fantasy output-wise. As long as they keep throwing the football, I think Dak Prescott is going to put up some huge numbers, and he'll be one of those guys that we talk about creeping up once we do this again in a few years. I bet he's going to be inside of the top 50 at quarterback for fantasy football purposes. At 68, a name that many of you might forget, or if you're young enough, may have never even heard, but Todd Heap. Todd Heap had a really nice run at tight end during the early part of the 2000s. In fact, he had a tight end 1 overall season and 3 additional, so 4 in total, top 6 seasons. But 3 of those 4, he was a top 3 guy. So he had a run of a stretch of 4 really good top 6 seasons over the course of 5 years. So he was a guy that was really steady, really reliable. And you could see we've already got quite a few Baltimore Raven tight ends that we've talked about on this episode. It seems like certain teams tend to produce guys a little more commonly at the position, and the Ravens are one of them. Todd Heap, so far the highest of the bunch that we have here in our top 100. At 67, man, I thought this was going to be a player that we would be talking about as the next LaDainian Tomlinson, Adrian Peterson, these top tier guys. And for a minute, he really, truly was. But those darn knee injuries, yep, things just didn't work out quite as good as we hoped for Todd Gurley. But man, the peak for Todd Gurley was really, really nice. Todd Gurley, over the course of 5 seasons, we saw 3 running back 1 seasons, 2 running back 2 seasons, and 2 of those seasons, he was running back 1 overall, and another one where he was a top 3 running back in the season over the course of 2017 and 2018. Had the knees held up, we probably would be looking at the tail end of his career right now, and we'd be talking about how good he was and how high he would finish on this list. But Of course, some guys it just doesn't work out quite as well for as it does for others. So we have him just a little bit lower on this list, but still there was a time where Todd Gurley was that guy. Speaking of a time where a player was that guy, just before our time with Todd Gurley, we had our time with the speedster, absolute burner out of East Carolina, and that was Chris Johnson. The Tennessee Titans running back was absolutely a monster for fantasy football purposes, and you just never knew when he was going to break off a 60, 70-yard run for a touchdown and totally make your week in a single play. He had 5 running back 1 seasons over the course of his career, and one of those seasons he was running back 1 overall. Did throw an additional running back 2 season in there. So from 2008 through 2013, Chris Johnson was a mainstay as a top tier running back that people were drafting in their leagues. Now, yes, maybe week to week it was a little frustrating. He tended to have some really huge weeks and then some weeks that were a little bit lower, but still, Chris Johnson put up huge numbers for fantasy football purposes, and that lands him on our list at 66. We only have one wide receiver in this episode, and that one guy is still playing and still putting up numbers. That guy is Stefon Diggs, a guy out of Maryland who, yeah, he didn't get the draft capital that most of the other wide receivers in this video got, but he made the most of his opportunities in both Minnesota and in Buffalo. So when you look at Stefon Diggs, he had 5 overall wide receiver, or I shouldn't say overall, but 5 seasons where he was a wide receiver 1. And 4 of those were all in a row. And in fact, over the course of his career since 2017, every single season he has been either a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2. So 4 of those were wide receiver 1 seasons, and 5 of those were wide receiver 1 seasons and 2 wide receiver 2. So 7 straight years of really, really good high-end production. And we even saw a top 3 finish and another top 6 finish out of Stefon Diggs. So it didn't really matter where he played, but especially when he went over to the Buffalo Bills, it seems like his game took another step up. He went a whole nother level. Stefon Diggs was an elite and maybe still could be good. We'll see. He's getting a little bit older now. He's heading to Houston, where it is a little bit of a crowded room, and the end of last season wasn't great for him. But still, overall, when you look at the breadth of his career, it's been pretty darn good. And overall, Stefon Diggs, very worthy candidate to be here, and we have him in here at 65. We have our second tight end of the episode, and it's Mr. George Kittle. Now, George Kittle, we're getting to see a little bit of the behind the scenes with him right now on the Receiver documentary. And man, he's just a fun dude. Just looks like somebody that would be thoroughly enjoyable to hang out with, but seems like a really good guy as well. But as far as for fantasy football purposes, he's been really, really good. Over the past 6 seasons, 5 of those 6 seasons, he's been a top 6 tight end. I almost said running back. Maybe he could do that too, but he's been a top 6 tight end, and 4 of those 6 and 3 of those 5 seasons over the past 6 years, he has been inside of the top 3. So George Kittle has put up huge numbers. And once again, we've mentioned it before, but tight end, one of those positions, there's not a lot of guys. So when you find one and they produce consistently at a top tier level, they are very valuable assets for fantasy football. And that's what you've gotten out of George Kittle over the past 6 seasons. I will never forgive this player for the 5 touchdown game he put up against me in the fantasy football playoffs in a year where I clearly was the best team and absolutely should have won the title. And that is Jamal Charles. Yes, Jamal Charles, absolute monster for fantasy football purposes. He only had 5 seasons where he was a running back 1 or 2, but never mind the running back 2 part. He was a running back 1 for each and every one of those seasons. So 5 of them where he was a running back 1. We had 2 of them inside the top 6. And one of those top 6 seasons, he was the number 1 overall running back in 2013. The guy is one of the most efficient runners of all time when we're looking at yards per carry. He could catch the ball in the backfield. He could do a little bit of everything. And in that Andy Reid offense, Jamal Charles just seemed to absolutely feast. So Jamal Charles comes in here at 63. At 62, we've got another running back. And in fact, all the running backs to end this episode. And we have Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, we know his career started a little bit slower out of Alabama when he was drafted by the Tennessee Titans. First 2 years, almost no production at all out of Derrick Henry. Then something clicked in year 3, and then it was off to the races for this guy. He has been a monster. We're talking 4 running back 1 seasons, 2 running back 2 seasons, but even in those seasons where he was an RB2, he put up numbers. When he was hurt, he was still a running back 2 despite missing half the season in 2021. So even in that season where he wasn't as good, he was still an absolute monster. We've seen 3 top 6 finishes and a top 3 finish out of Derrick Henry. So when you're looking at guys that maybe overcame some early career struggles, we've talked about a couple of them. This is another one. Had he figured it out early, easily inside the top 50, but still absolute monster career. And we might even get 1 or 2 more seasons with him in Baltimore, so he could still have an opportunity to climb up this list. Last one on this show, and this is another one for my OG fantasy football players. Early 2000s, we're looking at Clinton Portis, Denver running back, then went over to the Washington Redskins, and the dude was just absolute money. Now, he didn't necessarily have the peak that some of these other guys had, but man, over the course of 7 seasons, 6 of those 7 years, he was a running back 1. That's right, 6 running back 1 seasons. Dude was an absolute monster. 2 of those he did finish inside the top 6. No top 3 or number 1 overall, but man, just a player that you could plug into your lineup each and every week and like, oh, yep, I'm getting at least 15 points this week. Didn't even have to sweat it. Didn't even have to worry. In the end, yeah, maybe Champ Bailey got the better end of that deal overall, but when it comes to fantasy football, Clinton Portis was an absolute monster. All right, guys, that wraps up all the way through 61. Tomorrow, we have episode 5, which means picks 60 all the way through 51. And then coming back at you on Monday, we're going to have the rest of the top 50, 10 at a time, finishing overall on Friday. Hope you guys tune in for each and every episode of the top 100 fantasy football players of the 2000s.